part of what's so fascinating about what in many respects is a nascent conversation is how we come to understand really what is meant by this term personalized learning. And so the WISE folks have questioned and surveyed the community just to get a sense of how you all think about personalized learning, and has asked a little bit of this question: does one size fit all? And the second question is, should learning be entirely personalized? And we're split 50-50. And I think I'm guessing that part of the reason we're split 50-50 is that we all may have different definitions of what personalized learning means.
One of the key models that we have for the way that we learn is that we have the working memory and long-term memory. And the characteristics of those are that working memory has a very limited capacity and a short span. Long-term memory has a long span, a large capacity, and very importantly, what is stored in our long-term memory is highly structured. And so the process of learning something new involves taking that new thing, it comes into our short-term memory, and then we make connections to this highly structured long-term memory, and if we're lucky, that new thing is connected to our long-term memory and is retained and becomes part of those structures. And what we're really aiming to do is to try to develop ever larger groupings of structures in our long-term memory so that we can very rapidly access them and utilize them when we're learning new things or carrying out tasks. That model of the learning process drives personalization in 2 or 3 ways. One is the sequence, that if we accept that we are building on existing structures, then each of us has different structures in place when we first come to a new learning experience. And therefore, the sequence and selection of the learning activities to help us move forward is very critical and is very personal. And there's a lot of much deeper research on that, looking into different kinds of strategies to optimize sequencing. A second key element is load, that our working memory has a very limited capacity, and so trying to make sure we optimize the load so that it's not overloaded and the mist comes down and we can't learn and organize our learning, or underloaded so that we lose attention. And then the last piece is repetition and retention. So again, in order to make things stick in our long-term memory, it's not just enough to structure things, we also have to be engaged in a certain amount of repetition in order for the retention to take place.
The big aspect of assessment, and I'll finish on this point, is the idea that we need to have feedback as feed forward. And that's a simple idea with personalized learning. If a learner can act on feedback and move to the next stage, they'll continue to learn. And so assessment is a key aspect of this particular framework that I'm laying out here in terms of that. So for me, personalised learning is very qualitative, and so I differ a bit from Jim in some ways in that I put the learner at the centre. And what's the aspirations that we have for personalised learning? I come at things from an educational technology point of view and design point of view, but you'll notice in the conversation and the definition of personalised learning, I haven't mentioned many of those. It's about the learner, it's about empowering them, enabling them to keep learning and to move forward.
Personalized learning is an idea that's struggling for an identity. My biggest concern with the discourse or the dialogue on personalized learning now is that it's about technology, that personalized learning is equated to technology. And I'm a teacher, so when I think of what personalization is, it's really understanding and knowing the passions of the learners in the classroom. And if something happens with those students, you can understand where they are in their journey and you can support them. So personalization is about the person. It's not necessarily about an algorithm that is linear, mechanized. An algorithm doesn't know if a student has had breakfast or not when they come in to a learning environment. An algorithm, it's very difficult for an algorithm to talk about culture. Like in Alberta, First Nations, Métis, Inuit culture. An algorithm is not sophisticated enough to take people down these complex pathways. So when we talk about personalized learning, I think of it in terms of the highly relational space of learning between students and students, students and teachers, the community, parents. That's what personalization is.
What you can imagine is instead of a linear sequence of learning activities to take a learner through, we have a network of learning activities, And the purpose of the personalized learning system is to try and optimize the learning path that each individual learner follows through that network. And we're doing that using algorithms, which I don't believe is necessarily evil, using algorithms to dynamically modify the path for each learner as they go along. And we're using lots of different data, measurements of mastery, measurements of student behavior to try and optimize their path.
Technology certainly, it's a seduction, right? We get what we want, how we want, when we want it now with technologies, whether it's media, or you go to the banking. You can get these things at any time, any place, any pace. And that's starting to move into the education realm, but it's not recognizing that learning is constructed socially and much more complex.
What interests me about personalization, and I completely accept that it covers these much broader areas of learner empowerment and engagement that you're describing, Mike, is that it gives us an opportunity to use these same kinds of scientific methods, both in terms of applying research to the way we deliver learning, but also in terms of being able to extract data that can be analyzed, I hope, by teachers and not by system administrators, to make better data-driven decisions about how they teach.
If data collection is the answer for personalization, what is the question?
If we can even get 1% of the kind of benefits we've achieved in other areas of life through the use of that technique, then I think it's going to be a very worthwhile impact here. So I don't think the question is about whether algorithms are good, bad, or indifferent. We use algorithms all the time in everything we do. And the reason we use algorithms is because our brains only have a limited capacity, and the algorithms help us do things that we cannot do individually.
We live in this connected world, and we need a toolkit of literacies, of self-regulated learning, of different forms of assessment, of different ways of viewing the world. But we need to empower the learner and teacher to actually deal with this particular world. And I call this being a chaos pilot, because the world is so ambiguous. And I'd love it if someone could actually put forward a degree sometime to create chaos pilots.
In education, one of the things that I would really hate to see is a profiling of students that follows them for the rest of their lives, and by which we make decisions, or the worst scenario, the algorithm makes recommendations and decisions without any human intervention.
But the other way of looking at that is, if we know that early in that child's life, that gives us opportunities to step in and do things about that at that point to help that child change their direction.
The way I look at technology, I look at it as spaces. These are physical and virtual spaces that have different affordances or different capabilities to allow us to do more and to learn more. And so I think it gets back to that point that what we can do is enable the student to use these, because we're teaching them not only for now, but in the future. And they need the skills to interact in this environment. The fact is that what we're trying to do is teach our students to be discerning consumers of what they see and find and listen to. So part of the role of teaching students and teaching teachers about digital literacies is to get them to actually evaluate the credibility of information and to examine what is important, what isn't.
One of the things that is of great joy to me and great benefit is to introduce serendipity, chance and luck into what happens, that teachable moment. And I come to this event, and I have had great fortune to get to know people on this stage that I haven't, people in the audience that I've never met before, and that is in and of itself a learning experience that you can't necessarily construct, to introduce some randomness into a world that will be increasingly hyper-personalized and customized for us.